The father. John Emil List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. He was a conscientious and quiet man, deeply religious, and a high-ranking Lutheran. After serving in the military during World War II and studying accounting and business administration, he married a woman, Helen Morris Taylor, in 1951. Together, they had 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. The List family lived in Westfield, New Jersey, in a large Victorian mansion they called Breeze Knoll from the outside. The List family seemed perfect, a stately home, well-behaved children, and a respectable father. But behind this facade, there was turmoil. The religious facade. John List was a strict Lutheran and very disciplined. Over the years, however, he lost several jobs due to his lack of social skills and inability to get along with colleagues. Despite financial difficulties, he maintained the appearance of a wealthy and stable life, which became increasingly difficult. Helen suffered from an incurable disease that affected her mental health, and the children, especially Patricia, began to drift away from their father's strict religious upbringing. November 9, 1971. On this casual November morning, John List prepared to put his gruesome plan into action. He started the day like any other, but inside he was determined to make a horrifying decision. His wife Helen, who suffered from lupus and was increasingly depressed, began the day unaware of what was to come. John patiently waited until she sat in the kitchen, drinking her morning coffee. With a 9mm handgun he had acquired weeks earlier, he approached her from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The shot was fatal, and Helen collapsed instantly. John remained calm and composed, knowing his macabre task was far from over. Next, he turned to his 84-year-old mother Alma, who lived on the 3rd floor of the house. Alma, frail due to illness, spent most of her time in her room. John went upstairs, greeted her as usual, and then shot her in the head as well. Alma fell dead in her room. After killing his wife and mother, John knew he had more time before his children came home from school. He continued preparing the house by setting up religious music on the record player, creating an eerie backdrop for the remaining acts he was about to commit. The first to come home was his 16-year-old daughter Patricia. She had spent the afternoon at school and returned home as usual, unaware of the bloody scene awaiting her. John met her in the hallway and shot her without warning. Her body collapsed, and John dragged her into the ballroom, placing her on a sleeping bag and covering her with a cloth. Shortly after, his 13-year-old son Frederick came home. He, too, was caught off guard as he entered the door. Frederick had no chance to react before John shot him in the head. His lifeless body was also brought into the ballroom and laid next to his sister. Now only John Jr., the eldest son, who was at a football game at school, remained. John List drove to the local high school to pick up his 15-year-old son John Jr. from practice. John Jr. was unaware and happy that his father was picking him up. The two drove home, and upon entering the house, John led his son to the kitchen. There, he surprised him by firing multiple shots. John Jr. fought desperately for his life, which led to John List firing a total of 10 times at him. The boy suffered severe injuries and eventually died. John brought his lifeless body to the others in the ballroom, laying him next to his siblings. After murdering his entire family, John List made sure all the bodies were neatly lined up on sleeping bags in the ballroom. He prayed for their souls and wrote a 5-page confession letter to his pastor, justifying his actions. In the letter, he explained that he had to kill his family to save them from the sins of the world, and ensure they would go to heaven. John List took additional measures to prepare for his escape. He cancelled all newspaper subscriptions, milk deliveries, and mail services to ensure the house would go unnoticed for as long as possible. He turned on all the lights in the house, set the thermostat low to slow decomposition, and left the religious music playing before leaving the house. He cut his face out of all family photos to make identification more difficult and left Westfield to disappear. John List was convinced he had done the right thing and vanished without a trace. His perfect murder plan and meticulous preparation led to the murders being discovered only a month later, when neighbors noticed the lights burning out and no one picking up the mail or milk deliveries. When the police finally entered the house, they found the gruesome scene and the confession letter, revealing the dark motives behind the murders. By that time, John List was long gone, starting a new life, while the investigations to find him were in full swing. The escape. John List meticulously planned his escape. He took a train to Michigan and then continued to Colorado, where he began living under the name Robert Peter Clark, a former classmate he had known in his college years. In Denver, he found work as an accountant, allowing him to stay under the radar. He changed his appearance by wearing glasses and altering his hairstyle to be less conspicuous. He led an unremarkable life and, in 1985, married Dolores Miller, a widow who knew nothing of his dark past. The couple lived in a Denver suburb, where John presented himself as a devout and kind man who regularly attended church and was active in the community. No one suspected that this quiet man was responsible for the horrific crime in New Jersey. The manhunt. The police launched a large-scale manhunt for John List, but he remained elusive. The case attracted national attention, and authorities combed through leads and tips, all of which led to dead ends. John List had seemingly vanished without a trace, and despite intensive investigations, his whereabouts could not be determined. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The police pursued numerous leads and sightings, but none led to his arrest. Lists were distributed across America, and the case was covered in various media reports, but John List had masterfully erased his tracks. The technology of the 1970s and 1980s was not as advanced as today, making it even more challenging to locate fugitives. Over the years, the case grew colder, and the hopes of finding John List dwindled. However, investigators did not give up. They kept the case on their radar, waiting for the one crucial tip that would lead them to him. Meanwhile, John List lived under his new name, leading a seemingly normal life without anyone in his new community suspecting a thing. The breakthrough. In May 1989, the television show America's Most Wanted aired a segment about John List. Forensic artist Frank Bender created a bust, showing what List might look like after nearly 2 decades. The show garnered nationwide attention, and the bust was astonishingly accurate. It depicted an older man with glasses and a stern expression that closely resembled John List. The broadcast reached millions of viewers, and one of them, a neighbor of List in Denver, recognized him immediately. He contacted the authorities, reporting that his neighbor Robert Clark could indeed be John List. This critical tip led to John List's arrest on June 1, 1989, in Richmond, Virginia, where he was staying at the time. The police apprehended John List, and he initially denied his identity. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and he eventually confessed to his true identity. His arrest shocked his neighbors and his second wife, who had never suspected that the quiet, friendly man they knew was a cold-blooded murderer. The trial. John List was extradited to New Jersey and stood trial in 1990. The trial attracted massive media interest, and many were eager to see the man who had successfully evaded justice for nearly 2 decades. During the trial, List claimed that he had been mentally ill at the time of the murders and believed that he needed to kill his family to save them from the sins of the world. The prosecution argued that John List had meticulously planned and executed his actions with full awareness. They presented evidence that he had settled his finances, cancelled newspaper subscriptions, and taken steps to cover up the murders and facilitate his escape. The farewell letter to his pastor was cited as proof of his clear and deliberate intentions. The court found John List guilty of 5 counts of murder and sentenced him to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge described his actions as cold-blooded and inconceivably cruel, emphasizing that John List must take responsibility for his deeds. John List died on March 21, 2008, at the age of 82 in prison. The case of John List remains one of the most shocking family murder stories in American history, illustrating how a seemingly unremarkable man could become one of the most notorious killers of the 20th century. The story of John List serves as a reminder that even those who present a facade of a perfect life can harbor dark secrets,